Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. You know, I usually thank audiences for the invitation, but I don't get invited here, I just show up. And I appreciate that they allow me entrance every single time. It's always special to be in Arizona, and I'm finding as my time is getting closer to be finished with this task, it becomes more and more powerful to me. Because I've said this to you before, some of the issues that I face as in NEA as a whole are so foreign to me because the world I was brought up in Paradise Valley, EA, and in AEA, what we did just naturally seemed so foreign to others. The idea that you would sit at a table and talk about an issue to figure out what we ought to do, to some is not the norm. I remember as AEA president, I often bounded into the room going, I have a great idea. And they would say, no, Dennis, you have an idea. We will tell you whether it's a good idea or not. And the openness and the freedom to express ideas and to brainstorm and just to talk about issues together just isn't the norm. When I became president of AEA, one of the reading assignments I gave my executive committee is they all had to read the book called Teaching an Anthill to Fetch. It's about collaboration. And it says very simply that in a room of 10 or 12 or 300 people, it is absolutely impossible for one person to be smarter than the collective intelligence. And see, I believe that. And as an organization, our members are, whether it's a board of directors, executive committee, or a delegate assembly, do not make bad decisions. And as leaders, it is our responsibility to make sure they have all of the information, because if they do, they will make the right decision. And so that was the norm for me in Arizona, and I so appreciate it, and it has aided me so much in my work once I left this state. And I never, ever forget about this state and the leadership team of Andrew, Joe, and excuse me, and Nydia. There are not every state can talk about a leadership team like this. And you ought to be extremely proud of these three people and what they do for this organization. And my two colleagues on the board of directors, Esteban and Jason, I appreciate and value them. Cheryl, to you and the staff, I know under the most trying of circumstances, you do an incredible job. Absolutely incredible. And I must acknowledge Darwin. You know, 30 years ago this month, my first delegate assembly as president and his first delegate assembly as parliamentarian for AEA. And I want you to know we were both brunettes at the time. Oh my. You know, yesterday Andrew was having a little, and Joe were having a little fun on the introductions, and they introduced me as a member of the AEA board of directors. We got to look at this Constitution bylaws. See, there's a provision, as I recall, that says if you're serving in national office, you're an ex officio. When we passed that, we had no idea that there'd be somebody around as long as me. I mean, I first came on the AEA board of directors as treasurer of AEA in 1978. That's a long time ago. No, excuse me, 1980. You probably ought to look at that. It may not be a good.
We didn't know what ex officio meant.
And of course, I have to talk about Andrew's speech. You knew I would do this. Yeah. I love coming to delegate assemblies across the country and listening to the presidents. They are an amazing group of people. And I often have the opportunity to speak to groups, but I really relish the opportunity when I get to listen. And one thing I know when I come to AEA and I'm going to listen to Andrew give a speech, three things I know about me and you. Number one, we're going to laugh. He can't talk 2 minutes without saying something that we're going to laugh at. I mean, it's in here, and I love it in him. Number two, I know we will listen, because it's impossible to ignore him. He just grabs your attention, you know? You just, even when you try, you're going to listen. But number three, what I really appreciate is he always makes me think. I always bring a piece of paper to take notes, because he will say things that intrigue me and make me think and want me to continue this mental dialogue, to kind of go point counterpoint as he's speaking. And last night he reminded us of something really important, and that is when we talk about commitment or will, there are 3 levels. The first level is, I'll try. I'll try to achieve that. The second level is, I'll do my absolute best. And the third level is, I'll do whatever it takes. Now think back when you assigned homework and your student says, I don't have it done today, but I'll try to bring it in the morning. Or, I'll do my best to get it done tonight. Or they say, I will do whatever it takes to bring it in the morning. My guess is your confidence in whether you'll see it will vary greatly. And Andrew reminded us that as members of this organization, we, on an individual basis, have to decide whether we're willing to try to do our best or to do whatever it takes. But more importantly, he really challenged us, all of us. He challenged us to take action. He challenged and asked us, do we have the will, the commitment to live up to our promise? That's not a run-of-the-mill question. It's not something you ask a stranger that you just met over the course of a dinner. It's a powerful question that goes to the very soul of who you are and who an organization is when you say, do we have the will to fulfill our promise? But even more powerful for me was the question I heard him asking is, are we willing to connect who we are and our organization? Because I know who we are. We didn't happen to be where we are today. We chose to be in education. And the decision to come into education was not made because you wanted to be a member of NEA. I mean, I don't know of any 17 or 18-year-old who says, you know, what should I do in my professional life? I'd really like to be a member of NEA. I guess I'll go into education. That's really not the conversation I ever heard with my high school students. They chose education. And I love when you reflect on 2 really important questions. Do you remember when and why you chose to go into education? The answer to that is personal and powerful. When and why did you choose to go into education? And when I look at what's happened in the last 5 years, 10 years, tougher question is, why do you stay? Despite all they do, you keep coming back every fall. Why do you do that? And when we asked our ESP members, why did you choose education? More than 90% gave the same answer: to make a difference for kids. See, that's what makes us who we are. It is in our professional DNA to want to do something meaningful. It reflects our values as an organization. NEA Values talks about a just society, an equal opportunity. So you have to believe in that in order to give your heart and soul to be an educator. It is who we are. It is our professional DNA, and we are driven by those values. This organization reflects who we are. So when AEA's vision says keeping the promise of a quality public education, again, that wasn't made up as a clever phrase. It reflects who you are. And the NEA mission is so important and powerful to me. See, a mission tells you why you exist. It's your purpose. Anyone who begins an organization has to decide what it's going to do. Why is it going to exist? Now, NEA's mission says that we exist. Our purpose is to advocate for education professionals. That is a meaningful thing to say. because it reflects our values of professionalism. We respect the knowledge and skills that our people bring to the job every single day. Regardless of what your position is, you all have those professional skills. And we understand and value who you are. But it doesn't end there. It would be a great mission statement if that's all we did was to advocate for education professionals, but it doesn't end there. It goes on to say we want to unite our members and the nation because we value partnership. We know that this organization can never be so big, so strong, so powerful that we can do it by ourselves. We believe in partnerships. We value partnerships. But the next phrase is the one that just grabs my heart and soul. We say we exist. It is our purpose as an organization to fulfill the promise of public education. And not for some. To fulfill the promise of public education to prepare every child to succeed. I love the audacity of that statement. I love the word audacity. You know, when I was young, they always used it in a negative sense. I can't believe she had the audacity to wear that to church. But then when President Obama wrote his book, The Audacity of Hope, I understood that audacity can have this powerful, positive meaning. It says that you have the power, the ability to dream huge, beyond what other people see as possible. The audacity of the National Education Association to exist for the purpose of doing something that has never been accomplished in the world, ever in our history, to fulfill the promise of public education for every child. AEA is no different. When you say that keeping the promise of a quality public education, that's another way of saying the same thing. What an audacious goal is right. And we value collective action. But why do we use collective action? For what end? For what purpose? Just to be busy? To have something to do? We bargain, we get into political action, we organize. All of those are means of achieving what we say is our purpose to fulfill the promise of public education. So if we know who we are and we are aligned with our organization, what in the world is the problem? What's stopping us? What is getting in our way? Why haven't we achieved that? What I do know is right now today we are not standing still. We are losing ground. The outside forces are stronger than our ability to push back. And we have to think about what is it that we need to do. Curiosity. In this room, by a show of hands, how many of you began teaching in the fall of 2002 or later? Raise your hand. Keep them up. As you look at this group has been cheated and shortchanged. Because they have never taught in a world without No Child Left Behind. And I think it is so horribly wrong for them to have experienced all those years of teaching and not ever had the joy of what it was before we decided that testing was the means to the future. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you taught before the fall of 1983? Raise your hand. Now, obviously, this group over here, but there are a lot. And, of course, I'm in this group. Those of us who have our hands up right now, we are absolutely the luckiest people in the world. We are privileged and honored and blessed beyond belief because we got to teach in an era where education was not attacked. It was valued and held up in this nation. Now, we often say that the world is changing. I don't know what other people mean by that, but in my mind, I have a very distinct view of how the world has changed in my life as a student and as an educator. Pre-1983, for 35 years. What a history this nation had. We passed the GI Bill, the largest single investment by the federal government in education. Millions of people went to college who have never had the opportunity before. We had the National Defense Education Act. Think of this, Sputnik. And the nation was behind. The title of the bill says it all. The National Defense Education Act. The idea that if America was behind, the way you secured national security was to invest in education. We did the Elementary Secondary Education Act, IDEA, bilingual education, ESEA, I mentioned that, Migrant Education Act. We had Brown versus the Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and then unions, the number of union members in America reached its all-time high. And benefits, health benefits and pensions were the norm. And by the way, they used to exist in the private sector. We forget that. We didn't have them back then. We followed suit of the private sector, and today they're all gone. And they're on their road to do the same for us. They want them gone. It drives them nuts that there are billions and billions of dollars sitting there in pension funds, and they don't get it. They want that money. They don't want money from the taxes that are raised to go to you or to public employees when they could have it. FDR would have described that part. See, he had two different visions that he declared for America. This is in FDR Memorial in Washington, D.C., and he was talking about America, and he said, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, but whether we provide enough for those who have too little. And in that 35-year period, it was the mission of our great nation to provide enough to those who had too little. So productivity went up 119%. Hourly wages up 100%, almost the same. The lower 1/5 went up 122%, and the highest 1/5, 119%. So in a 35-year period, everyone was gaining and growing, and the middle class was thriving. But then we moved into a different cycle, providing more to the abundance of those who have much. And in the 30 years since A Nation at Risk, everything has changed. Nation at Risk, that report was the first time in my life where public education was defined as the problem, not the solution. And what saddens me, I just did an interview yesterday on the 30th anniversary of Nation at Risk. And I said to this reporter, you need to read the report. The report is excellent. All they focus on is the introduction, where it had these wonderfully written phrases, probably by an English teacher. They talked about the rising tide of mediocrity, committing educational disarmament, and that if a foreign power had done to our educational system what we have done to it ourselves, we would consider it an act of war. Strong language to say that the system was failing. In that 30-year period, the only real legislation that made a difference for us was No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. Compare that to what we did before. Always expanding, always acknowledging the value of education and investing in people. And it shows productivity in that 30-year period up 80%. Hourly wages, 8. The lowest 1/5, their wages went up 18%. The top 1/5, 65%. 3.5 times as much. And the top 1%, their wages went up 275%. So we've definitely moved into this era of providing more to those who already have it. That 30-year period also began a narrative that continues through today. It starts like this: public service is failing. And it's not just education. They're going after all public service employees. The system is failing because the people in it just don't care. They all go, in education, they say too many students are failing, and parents want something better. And if you need evidence, look at the test scores. Not every child is average yet. Did you hear what I said? Lake Wobegon, where every child is above average. That part of the narrative, that design of a system where it is impossible mathematically to achieve, that's not by accident. It didn't just happen, and it wasn't an error on their part. Intentionally, they want a system that forces us to look at failure. International results on the PISA test. They love to talk about America about somewhere in the middle. I love to point out to individuals, especially reporters, if you take all students in America that attend schools where there is less than 10% poverty, we are number 1 in the world. Number 1. So it isn't so much a question of excellence, it's a question of equity. And we have designed a system in this country that guarantees that that inequity will continue. The dropout rate doesn't fluctuate like the Dow Jones average. We graduate about 70% of our kids. If you're Native American, Hispanic, or African American, it's closer to 50%. And for the last 20 or 25 years, that rate is constant or very small variation. A system only produces what it is designed to produce. And if that doesn't make every American sit up and notice and say, why do we tolerate a system that will only graduate 70%? That the same group is held back and held down year after year after year. If only 70% of the light bulbs you bought worked, you would be furious. And yet we tolerate and accept this system for the last 30 years. And in the 21st century, there is no room for that system. It has to change. It has to be different. Then they move into the second part of the narrative. We're investing a lot of money, but we have been unable to change the system. Our biggest obstacle is the union. For 30 years, the system is failing, people in it don't care, and we can't fix it even with all the money we're investing because the unions are the problem. And we've allowed that narrative to stay. And when I say we've allowed it to stay, we try and fight against those negative ideas, but we don't refute the premise from which they start. The problems and challenges are real. Just as a sidelight, it's very interesting to me what happened just last week. You all know about the sequester, the automatic across-the-board cuts. They impacted all aspects of federal government. One of them was they furloughed air traffic controllers. And so for a whole week, there were delayed flights. Congress fixed it. They told FAA that they could move some 353 million to another place so they don't have to do furloughs. Think about this. They cut $3 billion from education, impacting 7.4 million children. Kids are being pulled out of Head Start, elderly are denied services, but for a few wealthy individuals who can fly, in 1 week they solved the problem and then they took a recess. They went home. That's a real problem. And for us in education, these problems and their sources, first of all, we have the reformers, or so-called. Michelle Rhee, a reformer. And that's what they call the DFERS, Democrats for Educational Reform. I sat down with them to try and understand what is it that you really want. What they really want, according to what they say, is exactly what we want. However, their funders are hedge fund guys. And their money-raising mechanism is to blast unions. I believe in partnerships. I don't know how you work with someone who is using us as their fundraiser to badmouth who we are and what we do. And then we have the privateers and the profiteers. This is a very small group of individuals. The Billionaire Boys Club, as some refers to them as. And what scares me is how few there are and what control they have. There aren't 500 of them. There aren't even 250. It's less than 100 people in America who are trying to change our whole culture and value system because they want to get richer. I mean, when you have $1 billion, how much more do you really need? And they're investing that money they have. They're investing in elections in March. LA school board race, $4.4 million spent for a school board race. The presidential election, both candidates spent close to $1 billion. Now, I don't know about you, but when I balance my checkbook, I don't use the billions digit very often. So I had to, I'm a math teacher, what could I say? I had to figure out, what does that really mean to raise $1 billion for a campaign for president? If you wanted to raise it in 3 years, there's 1,095 days in 3 years. Round down to 1,000. The division is very simple. 1 billion divided by 1,000. You have to raise $1 million a day for 3 years. Suppose it's Monday morning, it's the first day of the fundraising campaign. Who would you call? I mean, are you going to call 1 million people and ask for $1? I don't know if you can do that today. Here's the amazing part of this. And when you raise that kind of money, if I could give any person in this room $20 and my life won't change, I'll still make my house payment, I'll have dinner tonight. But if I gave you $10,000, I would have to make some real adjustments in my life. There are individuals who give checks for 10 and 20 and $50 million, and it doesn't change their life. It means it doesn't change their life. Now, that's incomprehensible to me. How could you write a check for $50 million and it not impact anything you do in your life? They are investing that money. They invested in the media. They own whole networks, right? They made 2 movies, millions of dollars to make and promote Waiting for Superman and Won't Back Down. All of that designed to paint a negative picture of who we are and what we do. And even worse, as Andrew talked about public education as the very foundation of this great nation, they're willing for that to be destroyed too. It's okay because, there's collateral damage. And if I'm going to become a multi-billionaire, some things have to give. And public education is one they're willing to give up. And so their theory of change, their theory of success is very clear. Number one, privatize education so you get a handle, so you have access to that $800 billion. Number two, blame and demean educators. And number three, destroy the unions and get them out of their way. As a sideline, we need a discussion in this country about public service and what's in the public good to either have as a public service or private. Example, why would you privatize prisons? Now think about this. If we formed a new company and we wanted to privatize a prison, my guess is our goal would be to have every bed full every night, kind of like a hotel. You don't want empty beds in a prison if you're trying for a profit. Would you worry about recidivism rates? Oh, no. You go out for 6 months and you're back? Cool. I like repeat stayers at my hotel. Do you worry about the pipeline, the school-to-prison pipeline that has absolutely shackled some of our African-American youth? Would you worry about that? Heck no. Automatic customers coming in. Would you worry? Would you want mandatory sentencing? Absolutely. guarantees how long they'll stay. No early checkouts. But is that in the public good? See, to me, in the public good, we want those beds empty. We want people who come there that when they leave, society is safer and they are productive. And we want to do something about the pipeline. So, not to get sidelined on that issue, but the bigger issue is a conversation of what makes sense to have provided at a public service versus private, because the motivation is different. So I know exactly how I feel about all of this that's going on. And Andrew gave me the name last night. Professional outrage. I love that word. Professional outrage. That is what I feel every single day. Because when they do all the things they're doing, it is a personal insult to me when they talk about my profession. And I take it very personally when they say that anyone with a degree in math can do what I did in the classroom. Are you kidding me? As if my job was to go to the front of the room and explain to my students that I already know how to do every problem in this book. Aren't you impressed? I mean, if that were true, anyone could teach first grade because the spelling words and math problems are easy. It is so ridiculous. And I can't tell you what a professional insult it is when I hear elementary teachers describe an elementary school where there's a clipboard outside of every door and it tells you in 10-minute increments what they're doing inside. How dare they do that to our profession? And it is a professional insult. When we have teachers all across this country where up to 50% and more of their professional evaluation is not only determined by test scores given one day of the year, but they are determined by test scores of students they've never taught nor know. Can you believe that? Just 2 weeks ago, we filed a lawsuit in Florida. Because in Florida, counting their state laws that have already passed, mandating an evaluation system that requires at least 50% be based on student test scores. A state law that will go into effect that it impacts your compensation, it impacts your ability to maintain a job, and we have 7 plaintiffs, and none of them teach the students whose test scores are used for their evaluation. One is a first grade teacher. They took all of the scores from students in a different elementary school. That's 50% of her evaluation. And when I say that to reporters, they just look at you and they go, "You're lying." No, I'm not. That's how ridiculous this world is. And it's a professional insult. I don't know about you, but I am just so sick and tired and I don't want to take this any longer. I don't want it. Maybe I've been in this game so long, there's a wonderful point in your life when Johnny Paycheck's song becomes real. That on any given day you can say, "Take this job and shove it, I'm not working here no more." It's an attitude to say that you've pushed me to the limit. You've insulted my professionalism, you have demeaned my professional practice, and you have destroyed the very thing that brings me to education and keeps me there. How dare you do that to people who give their lives to education? So my theory of success, my theory of change is very different than theirs. You see, what Andrew talked about when he called for change, the will, he wasn't asking us just to accept it. He was asking us to demand change, to lead the efforts to make it different. You can't sit by and wonder, what will it be like in 5 years? That is an inadequate response to our world. How dare we assume that this is one of the times that we can sit on the sidelines and watch events unfold? It's going to take every single one of us. You know, I'm always amazed at watching students when it's time to answer questions. The whole act of raising your hand is an incredible one. See, for some students, it's really a strategy question. If you know the answer, and your teacher is one that calls on the first hand, oh, I got it, because you know the answer. If you don't know the answer, then you move into a different strategy. Is this teacher one of those who calls on people who don't raise their hand or raise their hand? Because depending on that, I'm going to decide whether or not I raise my hand. Another strategy question is, you know that teacher. Does he or she call on people with whom they make eye contact? If the answer is yes, I'm looking down with my hand up. It's a strategy question. But there's also the time in every student's life when raising your hand is an act of courage because you care deeply about the subject, because you want to be engaged in this, but you're not sure of whether you're right. It's an act of courage. Or maybe you're one of those who just, it scares the bejeebies out of you to speak in front of the group. You're one of those shy kids. So when you affirmatively raise your hand to say, I'm in this game, it is truly an act of courage. I don't think it's any different for adults. You see, as I look what we need to do and my theory of change, I believe that we have to stop playing only defense. We have to stop all those technical terms, stupid ideas that come down the road. We have to fight against those, the ones that demean professionals and educators and do things that harm kids and public education. We have to fight against that. But when you fight negative, your victory is it stays the same. You don't gain anything. So fight after fight, time, energy, money, you get to stay where you are. I want to ask you, if all of the negative forces that right now are coming after us, if they just disappeared or took a pause, would you be satisfied? No. So it's not enough to stop bad ideas. We have to create an offense. We have to go for what we believe in. We have to reach for something we don't have now. And if we succeed, we get it. If we fail, we stay where we are. That's what I believe is our strategy. That is what I believe is our theory of success and change. We have to invest in the passion that brought every one of you into education and keeps you here. We must have an agenda that best defined for me is student-centered, union-led. That means we focus on what is stopping students from succeeding, and we define the answers. Not the legislature, not the governor, not Congress. We define what needs to be done to change what's happening to students. That will be an act of courage, because it's much easier to throw stones at someone else's idea than to propose your own, especially when the challenges are so tough. Implementation of Common Core standards. My guess is in your district, they're either doing it extremely well, so-so, or really badly. What are you doing to change that? Common Core standards, 46 states in the District of Columbia, we know they're much better than what most states had because we had teacher involvement and they helped write them. You can't measure them with a bubble test. That's good. We need standards that are real for our kids. We need a new generation of assessments. But how that is implemented, that's our responsibility. They should not be telling us what we ought to do. We ought to be finding the answers. When it comes to evaluation systems, if you have a crappy one in your district and they won't sit down and devise a new one, do it on your own. There is no rule, regulation, or law that says you can't bring a group of professionals together and say, this doesn't make sense, let's design one. student assessments, what parents want to know about their kids. When you go for your child, do you really want to only know their test score in math and reading? My guess is parents want to know, are they happy? Are they engaged? Do they love learning? We ought to devise that. How many of you in your life have heard a first, second, or third grade teacher say, I can tell you right now which kids aren't going to make it? Have you heard that? What does your system do in response? If the answer is nothing, I think that's malpractice and malfeasance. If I went to my doctor and he or she said, you know, I know you're not going to make it, but I'm not telling you what to do. Oh, I'd be upset. We ought to be demanding from the district and school board and the state to say, as a professional, I'm telling you right now, here are a group of students who may not make it successfully through this system. I demand that we do something as an intervention. I demand. How about that for a bargaining proposal? Put it on the table. From this day forward, no child will leave third grade in our district without knowing how to read well. And in first grade, if you identify and file a grievance, you're not taking care of this. By third grade, we have to have them there. It's taking responsibility to do what needs to be done to change that system. It is a system. It's not people doing nasty, evil, or mean things. It is a system. Deming has been saying it since World War II, that when there's a problem with results, it's not a personnel problem. It's a systems problem. We need to change that system. And one other piece of advice I would give you, stop waiting and asking for permission. Proceed until apprehended. I mean, I would love to be brought in on the carpet and them saying to me, how dare you do this that's better for kids? We didn't tell you to do that. Well, tough. I'm a professional, I believe it, I'm doing it. Let me close with this. I talked about this act of courage. It is. And I think it's going to be difficult for us because it is a bold step for us as the largest labor union in America. It's interesting, we're going to have a dues bylaw change at the RA that's going to be debated about allocating dues to a great public school fund. All of that money will go back to states and locals to lead the professional change. And I know all the arguments already, tough times. Here's what I also know. I understand the power of a union demanding a voice. You know, we've been around for over 150 years. We didn't start bargaining until 40 years ago. And the power of a union that said, we will not be denied our voice, we will be at the table, we will bargain salaries and benefits and working conditions. I understand the power of the union, the National Education Association. We've only been in politics since 1976. And I know the difference we've made. The power of a union staking its claim. And I also know the power of this union if we say we will have a voice in our profession and in our professional practice, and you will not deny us our voice. I know the power of that. I often talk and think about this thing called change. And there are a lot of theories. Some say change causes stress, so you need to learn how to manage stress. Then somebody else says, no, it's resisting change that causes stress. Because change is the only thing in the world that's constant. It just keeps changing. And this one author said, and if you don't believe me, look at your high school graduation picture. You can't stop the change. Some say it's personality-based. We have the early adapters and the resistors. And Dilbert says, change is good, you go first. Which is probably the most commonly adopted theory of change. Because we all know if someone else would just change, how much better our life would be. But the truth is, the only person you're really going to change is yourself. You get to decide. Hardest lesson from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for my high school students was this thing that between stimulus and response, there actually is a decision. They don't believe that. You diss me, I punch you. No, you can decide. That could be the choice, but there is a decision for us too. But my own theory of change is really simple. It's based on one thing. It's your satisfaction level. If you're satisfied with the way things are, why would you want change? If you're in the wealthiest 1% in this country, I can't think of any change in the tax laws I would want. It's working pretty well. And in fact, the system worked for all of us in this room. We're all here. So what's your satisfaction level with a system that doesn't deliver for all? What are you most dissatisfied about? That will determine of whether you are not only willing to change, but you are demanding change. See, when you leave this delegate assembly, I hope you are dissatisfied. I hope you are so dissatisfied with the status quo in this country that denies education to kids, that has the wrong people giving ideas and mandates about what needs to be done. In fact, when you leave this delegate assembly, I hope you are gloriously dissatisfied. Dissatisfied that membership in AEA ought to be 85–90%. How dare someone who came into this profession not want to be part of changing what's happening to our kids and what's changing our profession? We need to find a way to communicate better. We need every single one of them. And if they're interested in organizing for politics, let's get them. If they love bargaining, let's get them. If they love professional issues, let's get them. It will take all of us. We need to do that. And I want you to be so gloriously dissatisfied that you just have to do something other than what you've done in the past. Because if we continue to do what we've always done, we'll continue to get what we always got. This great organization had the audacity to dream big. We had the audacity to dream big, and I believe we have the power, the ability to act, to influence, to make a difference. We have that. The only question left to us is, do we have the courage to act? AEA and NEA, let's do it together. Thank God for this great organization. Thank you very much. I don't know how long to talk.
A math teacher from the Paradise Valley Education Association, Dennis Van Roekel. Dennis, thank you very, very much indeed. Let's see, you said bull, right? You stopped at that. You said bull. All right, well, that's why you've gone as far as you've gone. We will proceed now to the legislative platform, consideration of the legislative platform, and I recognize Marisol Garcia, Chair of the Government Relations and Legislative Action Task Force, for their report. Please refer to the 2013 legislative